a man entered the headquarters with the help of a
Thank
pair
you
of
so
worn
much for helping
crutches,
me.
looking like someone who had struggled for years just to survive. His clothes were plain, his shoes were faded, and nothing about him suggested wealth or influence. Across the lobby, a young woman stood quietly in line with dozens of other applicants. She wasn't there to chase a dream. She was there because her mother's medical treatment depended on finding a stable job before it was too late. Neither of them realized that a single act of kindness would change the course of both their lives forever. The entrance hall of Hargrove Enterprises reflected luxury from every corner. Polished marble stretched across the floor. Enormous glass walls reached toward the ceiling, and security officers stood at every entrance with disciplined precision. The man on crutches observed everything without drawing attention to himself. His name was Jalen. No one recognized that he was actually the owner of the entire company. This unusual routine had become his personal habit. Every few months, he disguised himself as an ordinary visitor to discover how employees treated people they believed had no status or power. What he witnessed that morning disappointed him immediately. A few applicants were quietly mocking another woman standing nearby. "She looks like she borrowed those clothes from a donation box," one whispered with a smirk. Another laughed. "I doubt she even belongs in a place like this." The young woman ignored every insult. She simply held her folder tightly against her chest and kept her eyes fixed on the elevator doors. Her name badge read Morgan. Her outfit was modest but carefully pressed. Someone had clearly taken the time to prepare despite having very little. Even the small scratch on the front of her shoe suggested she had walked a long distance to be there. Jalen noticed something else. She never reacted. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. Instead, she took slow, controlled breaths, as if reminding herself that this opportunity was too important to lose. He could almost hear the silent prayer in her heart. "Please, just give me one chance." The senior HR supervisor, Tara, glanced toward the man with crutches and frowned with obvious irritation. "Why are people like him even allowed inside?" she muttered to her colleague. "This is a corporate headquarters, not a charity center." The comment drew quiet laughter. Jalen remained silent. He simply adjusted his grip on the crutches as the elevator doors opened. Everyone rushed inside. As he stepped forward, one crutch caught the edge of the polished floor. He lost his balance. It wasn't a dramatic fall, just enough to keep him from entering before the doors slid shut. Within seconds, the elevator disappeared, leaving him standing alone. A soft voice came from beside him. "Are you all right?" He turned. It was Morgan. Morgan offered him a gentle smile instead of pity. "I think there's another elevator down this hallway," she said calmly. "It takes a little longer, but we'll still get upstairs." Without waiting for thanks, she slowed her pace so he could walk beside her comfortably. Jalen watched her carefully. She wasn't helping because anyone was watching. She wasn't trying to impress the recruiters. She simply believed that if someone needed help, you helped them. While they waited for the second elevator, Morgan quietly reviewed answers under her breath. Jalen finally asked, "Big interview?" She let out a nervous laugh. "The biggest day of my life." "What makes it so important?" She hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. "My mother is receiving treatment, but our insurance stopped paying for it. If I don't get this job, I honestly don't know what happens next." There was no self-pity in her voice. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was simply telling the truth. The elevator doors opened. They rode upward in silence. The recruitment floor looked even more impressive than the lobby. Glass offices lined both sides of the hallway. Candidates waited outside interview rooms, each holding folders filled with resumes, certificates, and hope. Morgan took her assigned seat while Jalen remained nearby, pretending to wait for someone. From across the room, he quietly observed the hiring staff. Tara moved confidently from desk to desk, calling applicants one after another without showing much emotion. Nearly 20 minutes passed. Finally, she stepped into the hallway. Morgan Ellis. Morgan stood immediately. She straightened her jacket, picked up her folder, and took one deep breath before walking toward the interview room. At that exact moment, a loud crack echoed through the hallway. One of Jalen's crutches snapped completely. He lost his balance and crashed onto one knee as the broken crutch slid several feet across the polished floor. Every conversation stopped. People turned to stare. Morgan froze. She looked at the open interview room. Then she looked back at the injured stranger struggling to stand. For just a second, she had a choice. Walk into the interview, or help someone who clearly needed assistance. Without saying a word, she turned around. She hurried toward Jalen. "Easy. Don't move too fast," she said as she picked up the broken crutch. She helped him regain his balance, checked that he wasn't seriously hurt, and stayed beside him until he could stand safely again. The entire moment lasted barely a minute. When she looked back, the interview room door had already closed. Tara had moved on. A receptionist approached carefully. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "The panel has started interviewing the next candidate." Morgan blinked. "So, that's it?" The receptionist nodded with sympathy. "If an applicant isn't present when called, it's considered a withdrawal." Silence. Morgan didn't argue. She didn't beg. She didn't blame anyone. She simply lowered her eyes, returned to her chair, and sat down quietly. She opened her folder once more. But this time, she wasn't reading anything. She was only staring at the pages, trying to accept that the opportunity she'd fought so hard for had disappeared in less than 60 seconds. Jalen stood motionless. A heavy feeling settled in his chest. For the first time since he had begun secretly testing his company, he wondered if this experiment had just cost an innocent person everything. That evening, Jalen sat alone in the back seat of his car, parked beneath the glowing lights of the company headquarters. For the first time in years, the results of one of his secret inspections didn't feel satisfying. They felt painful. He couldn't stop thinking about the young woman who had sacrificed the most important interview of her life to help a complete stranger. He had created those hidden tests to expose selfishness inside his company. Instead, he had watched genuine kindness pay the highest price. The memory refused to leave him. Morgan hadn't complained. She hadn't demanded another chance. She had simply accepted the loss and walked away with quiet dignity. Jalen closed his eyes. Something about that silence hurt more than any accusation ever could. His thoughts were interrupted when his phone vibrated. It was an urgent message from the company's chief security officer. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. Devin is gathering support to remove you as CEO. Several directors are already backing him." Jalen stared at the screen for a few seconds before replying, "I'll be there." He knew this confrontation had been coming. For weeks, suspicious financial reports had been appearing on his desk. Invoices from companies that barely existed. Payments approved without proper documentation. Money disappearing through complicated transactions that seemed almost impossible to trace. His finance department had finally uncovered the truth. Someone inside the company, had been quietly stealing from Hargrove Enterprises for more than a year. Every trail pointed toward one man, his uncle, Devin, a respected executive, a trusted family member, and the person everyone believed would never betray the company. The following morning, the boardroom filled long before the meeting officially began. Devin greeted each director with confident smiles and friendly conversation. He looked calm, almost relaxed. When everyone had taken their seats, he stood and addressed the room. "I'm afraid our company has entered an unstable period," he began. "Our current leadership has become distracted. For the protection of our shareholders, I believe temporary management is necessary." Several directors nodded in agreement. Others exchanged uncertain looks. Just then, the conference room doors opened. Every head turned. Jalen entered, wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit. There were no crutches, no old hoodie, no disguise. He carried himself with complete confidence. The room instantly fell silent. Devin's smile remained on his face, but only for a moment. "I wasn't expecting you," he said. Jalen calmly walked to the head of the table. "I know." He placed several folders in front of each director. "Before anyone votes," he said evenly, "I'd like everyone to read those documents." The directors opened the files. Inside were bank statements, transfer records, corporate registrations, and detailed financial reports. Jalen looked directly at Devin. "These records cover 18 months of fraudulent activity. The investigation has already identified dozens of fake vendors, unauthorized transfers, and over $1 million that disappeared through shell companies." The room became completely silent. One director slowly looked up. "Is this real?" Before anyone else could speak, Devin pushed the folder aside. "This is nonsense," he said firmly. "A desperate attempt to protect your position." Jalen didn't raise his voice. Instead, he pressed a button on the conference table. The doors opened once again. 2 federal investigators stepped inside. Every face in the room changed. For the first time, Devin's confidence disappeared. The room fell into complete silence as the 2 investigators walked toward the conference table. Every director looked from Jalen to Devin, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. Devin forced a smile, but the confidence he had worn only moments earlier had vanished. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said carefully. Jalen met his eyes without emotion. "There isn't." He nodded toward the investigators. One of them placed an evidence folder on the table. Inside were financial records, signed contracts, email exchanges, and transaction histories that painted a disturbing picture.